Well, hello there. I'm about to move to a new workshop, and while planning for the move, I started thinking that I probably don't want to move all the lumber I have here, lying around, scrap pieces from previous projects, and random pieces here and there. So I decided to build a few cutting boards. You can see them here before the move. The few cutting boards turned out to be 34 to be exact, so I actually had more wood than I was thinking for, but if you're interested to see how I built, there's many different types. There's face grain, there's edge grain, there's end grain, there's a few guitar shaped kind of special ones. So if you want to see how I built them, enjoy the video. Everything did not go well with this build. You saw the sneak preview what happened with my router. I will explain later in this video what happened and how I will try to avoid it in future, but that was way too close. That could have ended up pretty badly for my fingers. So as I explained in beginning and you saw on that clip, I had lots of scrap wood, lots of pieces lying around, and when I started this project I had absolutely no idea what kind of boards I will be making, how many will I do, and how everything will turn out. So the only thing that I could actually do to start was start milling my lumber and start building my first cutting boards and see where it takes me. On this video I will show things in chronological order, so the way I built them. So you will see I first started building those end grain boards, then I move over to my edge grain boards, and I will be doing lots of stuff in parallel. One of the main goals I had with this build was that eventually when I reach the point when it's time to start sanding all the cutting boards, I wanted every single one to be at the same phase, so regardless if they were face grain or edge grain or end grain, I attempted to have everything on the same step once I get there. That's why you see me sometimes doing things in maybe weird order, but eventually I will land to a phase where everything is in the same phase, and then I can start the finishing process at the same time for every single one. Because in the end, when you have 34 boards as it turned out to be, it just made things a lot faster in the end when I was able to streamline my process doing the same thing for every board at the later phases. So what I'm working now is the edge grain ones, and you saw on the previous clip that there's a lot of sawdust coming when you mill the wood. And at least my dust collection is not very good, I think, because my shop is always full of sawdust all over the place, even though I actually have two different dust collection units. But I guess the machines I have are not that good, or there's something wrong with my ducting, or people in YouTube normally just hide the fact that when you build stuff there will be a big mess. But at least for me, whenever I build something like this, it's a huge mess in my shop. These blocks are roughly 4 centimeters in width. I will mill them down a bit from that one, but I made them the same to make the glue up easier. And this was the phase when I could start being as creative as I want, so I could mix and match the colors in any way I like. So I had walnut, I had ash, I had birch, I had purple heart, I had paddock, even a bit of, I think it was red oak, probably a couple of different species as well. So lots of different colors, lots of different options for mixing and matching the wood. And eventually when I was happy with the layout, I started doing the glue ups, and I only have clamps so that I could have something between 3 to 5 boards in glue up at the same time. And when you do the math that I did 34 boards, it actually took a while for me to get everything glued up, because I am not doing this full time. I don't make my living from woodworking, it's still a hobby for me. So basically I've been doing this stuff on evenings and weekends. So calendar wise, it actually took a while for me to get everything glued up. While I was doing the glue ups for the edge grain boards, the good thing is I could work with other cutting boards I was making. So here you see me making some of the end grain boards, and these are pure walnut, and you see me kind of cutting them with my crosscut sled to the size I want, and then playing around again with the layout. So I was kind of playing with different styles how I want to organize them. But this was the good thing, that I was working with many different kind of boards. When I was waiting for the others to glue, then I could work with something else, because as I mentioned, my goal was to get everything to the same phase when it's time to start finishing them. So with the amount of material I had, it turned out that I was able to create 3 end grain boards with this walnut. And here you see the shop where I have some boards already glued up, some are in clamps. So it was a bit of an operation all the time. Off camera I used my drum sander to make these strips ready for glue up, and here you see me starting to glue the first one, and you see it didn't really go that well, so time to work on the layout again and put them in an order I want. That really wasn't a big issue. I think it took like 1 minute to reorganize them to be in the shape and form where I want. But anyway, then it was time to start gluing up these 3 boards. By the way, guess how much glue I used on this project roughly. So make a comment if you want. So as mentioned, I built 34 boards in total, and I was a bit surprised, to be honest, how much glue went into this project. Maybe I use it too much, but still, make a guess if you want. I live in Finland, and out of interest I was actually checking from Amazon how much Titebond 3 costs in US and compared it to the prices that we pay for it in Finland, and it's about 3 times more expensive to buy this stuff in Finland. So when you use a lot of glue for this kind of project, the cost actually starts to add up when you pay 3 times the more. But I don't know if there's a good other option available in Europe that would be a glue that I could start using. So Titebond has been very reliable, but it is a bit costly when compared to the prices in USA. Oh well, it is what it is. Then I started working on the edge grain boards again, and even though they now had all the glue spots and they were not flat, I decided to push them through my planer, knowing that they will not be flat at this phase. I will make them flat later on, but this was just to make sure that I can then start cutting these on my crosscut sled, because I wanted to do that step next. So when I started this project, I actually didn't have a crosscut sled. So somewhere along the line during this project, I built this super quick, super simple crosscut sled. I do have a video on it on this channel, but this is like probably one of the simplest crosscut sleds you can do. I think it took like 30 to 40 minutes for me to build. I didn't use any advanced techniques like 5-cut method or stuff like that. You don't really need that stuff in order to make a working crosscut sled. So in case you're interested, you can check the video from my channel. But this worked great for this project. It got the job done that I wanted it to do. Now, what to do with those small pieces of wood that I now cut off? Can't really use them to build anything. But as I mentioned, I live in Finland. It is October now. It's getting cold. I think we are very close in getting the first snow on the ground as well. So why not use my fireplace to burn the wood? This is anyway how I very often get rid of my scrap wood. So either burn it in this one or heat up my sauna with the wood. So I guess it's the benefit of living in a cold country is that I don't really need to care about the scrap wood that much, because there's always use for it. So what you have seen me build so far is the end grain boards from walnut. Lots of different edge grain boards from various species of wood. But then I had my scrap pieces from my earlier projects. And there, as is usual with scrap piles, the wood comes in multiple shapes and forms. So it was a bit of an effort to mill everything into something that I can use. I used the in and out method on my jointer to make the glue ups a bit easier. But it took a while to make everything into proper thickness, into something I could use. But I think this is a good way to use the scrap wood, because at least personally, otherwise it just waits for something in my shop. I don't really know where else to use that except for cutting boards. While I was waiting the glue to dry on those ones, I started working on a very simple but interesting face grain boards where I will be using this acrylic template to draw a shape of a guitar. And from my previous build where I did this Bourbon Moth whiskey cabinet as a TV stand, I made a mistake on that project. I accidentally overdid my boards, and I have had this walnut piece lying around in my shop for a long time. I always knew that eventually I will make a cutting board out of it. Now was the perfect time because it actually fit this guitar shape as well. So I decided to do 2 of these guitar shaped boards as well. I will eventually use the acrylic template with my router to make the final shape and form. But before, I obviously need to cut as much of the material as possible, and here I think the best thing to do is to use a bandsaw. I was lazy. I didn't want to change the blade, so this wasn't the best blade to use for this because I couldn't really do the turns and curves, which caused a bit of an issue later on. I'm using double-sided tape to attach the template to the board. And then it's time to start routing. And there's 2 issues. One issue is that I left too much material with the bandsaw. And the other one is that I'm using this actually cheap router bit that's a bit dangerous, to be honest, because it's not the high quality one, doesn't do the perfect cut, and it's also so big and heavy that even the smallest mistake with that one can lead to a bit of a disaster, as actually did happen to me. So in a few moments you will see how violent that bit can be when things are not going as they should. And I actually took this board to scale, and it weighs about 3.5 kilos, so it's very heavy. I had a safe feeling that it's so heavy that nothing will happen, but I mean the force that the router with this kind of bit has, there's absolutely nothing you can do if it decides to do a kickback or whatever it's called, what's happening here. I consider myself lucky. My fingers were not in a bad place, because if they were, that would have been a different story. So nothing happened, but if you look at the clip actually again, you can see that my drill press actually takes the hit, and you can imagine the force or check the force that it actually hits it with. So it was a pretty violent thing. But anyway, after switching my underpants, calming down a bit, I got back to work. I actually threw that bit away. I made the decision that my time is over with those cheap bits that don't do a clean cut, because I think it's much more unlikely that those things will happen when I use smaller bits with better quality. So that was one of the cheap ones. I bought it from Amazon or Temu, but anyway, I threw it out now. So in the future I will be using more quality router bits. I think I learned my lesson. But I also want to highlight that the other mistake I did was that I left too much material on the board. So those 2 things combined actually caused the thing that happened there. So be careful out there, people. Back to the build. Here I'm using drum sander to get the surface ready for the second glue up with the second set of end grain boards that I'm making. So the next phase will be again using the crosscut sled to cut these into strips that I want. And here the width I do the cut will be the height of the cutting board, so you have the freedom to choose what kind of board you want. I think I went with roughly 4 centimeters. Like with the walnut end grain boards, as I'm cutting these to the same width, I can do mix and match with this one as well. So only creativity is now the limit how I want the layout to look like. Having said that, I didn't go very wild, so you can see me playing with the different layouts. And obviously at the end of the video you will see how this turned out, but it's pretty interesting because you can do basically however you want.
with a bit more experience and design, this could obviously be very interesting when you already kind of know what kind of layout you do and you do the glue ups based on those. For me, I just glued everything together and then figured out the way I want these to be. But I'm actually very happy how they turned out. So some of these I kept like this symmetrical, and for a few I made this totally random pattern. It's not really a chaos board, but it's still fully random pattern. So I think they all actually look pretty nice once finished. So this is where I ended up, 7 end grain boards with the layout of my choosing. And as I mentioned, everything is shown in chronological order. So here's a status update how the edge grain boards look like. So they are still waiting to be finished. Now, I don't usually use my drum sander that much. It's a very expensive piece of equipment that's mainly lying unused in my shop. Kind of like owning a boat, which I would guess normally people have them in the shore unused 95% of the time. For me, the drum sander is similar, so I rarely use it, but in this project when I built 34 of these boards and I used the drum sander for pretty much every single board, I was super happy that I have it. So is it required? Is it mandatory? No. But did it make my life easier? Oh yes. But as mentioned, it is still a very expensive piece of equipment. I would almost say it's like a novelty item. I mean, yes, it has a purpose, but in my use, I can't really justify owning it, but I'm happy that I do. Process for building these end grain boards is obviously the same than for any other end grain boards like the walnut ones I did earlier. So after the glue up, I again used my drum sander to get them flat and get all the unevenness out, the glue spots out. Then I used my crosscut sled again to make them square. And after that I was pretty much done with these boards in a way that they are starting to be on the same phase than the edge grain boards and the others I have done before. So I'm getting very close on being on a phase where I can start finishing all of the boards at the same time. So here you see me making more firewood to my fireplace and heating up my sauna. But I have to say there's something oddly satisfying on this phase. So when these boards are like this not completed, looking very messy, just this one cut with a crosscut sled and you get the perfect 90s on every corner and they suddenly start to look almost ready. It's one of the phases that just gets me motivated. It's fun to do. Now here's a bit of an issue. Some of my boards are not flat. It's very easy to try on your table saw because that's usually a very flat surface and you see that the corner is not flat. So I needed to figure out a way how to make them flat, because a cutting board that rocks even a little bit will be almost unusable, at least personally. I hate it. So the solution was to build a very simple sled that I'm using with my planer. And I didn't even do the hot glue version. I don't think it actually needs one. So the basic idea here is to shim the board with that sled so that it's even, and then the planer will actually take out the high spots. And then you take the board out from the sled, flip it over, run it through, and then it will be completely flat on both sides. So it was actually a very easy one to do. I've never tried it before, I've seen it in videos, but it's a very, very simple and easy way to get them flat in case you end up in the same situation than where I was, that there's one corner not exactly flat. Now the end grain boards, never ever put them to your planer. That's why I'm using the same sled with my drum sander. On that one I ended up using hot glue as well because it didn't really hold them like the planer does. So a bit of hot glue to the board made life a bit easier. But then it was time to start sanding the guitar shaped boards so that they will also be ready and in the same phase than all the other boards. So with that I'm actually on the phase where every single board is now on the same phase, which is great. So the next step for me is to add a bit of a round over to every single board. It's both functional and kind of aesthetical, so it's nicer to touch, and it's, in my opinion at least, it looks more finished and more polished when you add a round over or chamfer to it. So from this point on, pretty much every single thing I do, I needed to repeat 34 times, because I'm doing now the same thing for every single board, with the only exception being the guitar shaped boards, where I didn't add this handle to the hands, because on that one you can actually grab it from the neck easily from the table. So that's the only difference, but other than that, everything else repeat 34 times. Getting back to router bits, for this one I actually ordered a decent or high quality router bit from Freud, and the bit I'm using in this round nose router bit, which I'm using to make the handles for hands so that the board will be easier to pick up when it is on a table. I'll spare you from all the footage from sanding, but one thing here, I did hand sand all these finger holes because I don't have any tool that will actually reach into it. So then I sanded all the boards. I started with 80 grit, then 120 grit, then I went to 180 grit, and that's when I did the water popping. And for the ones who don't know, water popping, I would say especially with cutting boards, is a mandatory thing, because it will raise the grain, and then when you do the final sanding, the end result will be super smooth and it will not feel bad after you start using it. So very, very highly recommended. But yeah, in the end I sanded with 240 grit as the final one. And now I'm very, very close on being complete. The last sanding, as I mentioned, with 240 grit, and that was a quick one because the only thing to sand is basically take out the grain that was lifted up after the water popping. So this was a quick one, and then I was ready to start applying the finish. And the way I did it was that I first did only mineral oil, then I left them to dry or soak it up for the night, came back on the next day when I added my kind of own mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. But here let's watch some footage of me applying the finish to the boards.
Searching for greatness in a sea of the dying and shameless, a sea of the aimless. I don't wanna be one of the nameless. I'ma wake up with the mindset that one day I'm gonna make it, and I don't think I'll be fine if I don't break my limitations. Don't try to stop me, I exist to write my own story. I'll make a decision if I want some peace or if I want the glory. Yeah, don't want a life that is complacent or possibly boring. I just want a life that is worth every day exploring. My whole life I just wanted someone who would notice me. My whole life I just wanted to be somebody to be. Yeah, I just wanna be great. 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 Yeah,
The only thing left to be done is to add this mineral oil and beeswax mixture to the boards and wipe it off, and then I was done. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would appreciate a subscription and a like. Please leave any comments or questions you might have, and here's some footage of the finished boards.